All right. So now we're going to talk about how your digestive system is regulated. Specifically, we'll talk about the stomach first, but how your digestive system is regulated. So you have the nervous system and the endocrine system that are both collaborating to help your digestive system function. There is an increase in gastric secretion, so your hydrochloric acid and your enzymes that the stomach produces, as well as motility of the stomach and digestive system when your food is eaten. When the stomach is empty, these functions, the gastric secretions and the motility will stop or decrease. So this is why, say, when you think about food, when you smell food, when you see food, your stomach starts to growl because your body is priming the pump, your body is priming your digestive system to get ready for the food that you're about to ingest. And then once you eat the food, then more secretions will occur and more motility will occur. And then once your food has left the stomach, then the stomach will stop secreting and will stop moving. And the rest of the digestive system will increase secretions and motility. Your gastric activity is divided into 3 phases. You have your cephalic phase, your gastric phase, intestinal phase. Remember, cephalic means pertaining to the head, gastric means pertaining to the stomach, and of course, intestinal has to do with the intestines. So the cephalic phase is when your stomach is controlled by the brain. Again, think about when you think about food, when you see food, when you smell food. You haven't started eating yet, so this is literally your brain starting the process in your stomach. That is the cephalic phase. All of these phases can work individually, but they also may overlap and work simultaneously. So this is just a description of each of the phases. So this is what happens when you, so the sensory input, when you see it, when you smell it, the mental input, when you think about food, the vagus nerve. Remember, I told you that that's the longest nerve and it goes all the way down into your abdomen. You can see here that it's actually stimulating and innervating the stomach. When you're thinking about food, when your senses get a whiff of food, it starts the process. It starts this gastric motility, and it starts with secreting digestive enzymes. And then as the food gets into the stomach, this increases, the motility increases so that you have more of that to actually help you to digest the food. And then once you've broken down the food sufficiently, it moves from your stomach and begins to move into your intestines. The small intestines will receive the chyme. Remember, chyme is that bolus of food that is now mixed with saliva and hydrochloric acid and digestive enzymes. And it's very, very broken down, or it's very broken down, not very, very. So once the chyme gets into the small intestines from the stomach, then your liver and your pancreas will secrete digestive enzymes into the small intestines to help that digest more. Keep in mind that your digestive processes, only about 10 to 15% of your food is digested by the time it gets to the stomach and in the stomach. The rest of the digestion, the bulk of the digestion happens in the intestines. And this is basically how it happens. Food gets into the small intestines. You have the liver and the pancreas that secretes those enzymes that helps to further digest the food. Now you have bile. Bile is a fluid that is produced by the liver, and it is sequestered in the gallbladder. Bile is a yellow-green fluid, and inside of bile, you have a whole lot of things like minerals, cholesterol, fat, bile, pigments, as well as bile acids. Excuse me. So bilirubin. Bilirubin is the main pigment that, is a pigment that comes from hemoglobin when it is decomposed. So when you have old red blood cells, they go to the spleen, and the spleen is like, all right, you've done your job. Thank you for your service. And it decommissions it. It destroys the red blood cell, and it takes all of those pieces and parts and redistributes it so that it can be used by other parts of the body, or so that it can be removed from the body through through one of the routes of elimination. So that is what bilirubin is. In your large intestines, you have a bunch of bacteria that will take this bilirubin and turn it into urobilinogen. Bilirubin to urobilinogen. Urobilinogen is what is responsible for making your poop brown. All right. Bile acids or bile salts are steroids that are synthesized from cholesterol. Remember, cholesterol is not all bad. Your body needs cholesterol to help create your steroid hormones, right? And so that's your estrogen, testosterone, as well as others. Bile acids and lecithin, which is a type of phospholipid. These are things that actually help your body digest and absorb fats. So the bile acids, the bile that is sequestered in your gallbladder, along with this phospholipid called lecithin, is what helps your body to absorb fat. So if any of you have ever had your gallbladder removed, then you know that you have to be very careful with how much fat you eat, because you no longer have sequestered bile that will help to digest and absorb that. So if a person who does not have their gallbladder, who no longer has their gallbladder, eats very fatty foods, if they're not taking a supplement of bile, usually it's ox bile, if they're not taking that, then they will have very fatty stools shortly after that meal. Gallstones are formed from bile in the gallbladder when it becomes extremely concentrated. So if your body is not able to, like your liver brings that bile into the gallbladder, and it sits there waiting for food. If it sits there too long, or if there are lots of waste products that are mixed in, I guess, it can become hardened and form those stones. So this is basically what gallstones are: bile that is concentrated and full of other things, and it just turns into these stones of varying sizes. You can have some that are extremely small, and you can have some that are very big. Bile gets into the gallbladder by first filling the bile duct, and then overflowing into the gallbladder. So your bile duct will receive some of the bile from your liver, and then as the liver continues to produce it, it'll eventually overflow into the gallbladder. The liver secretes about 500 to 1,000 milliliters of bile every day. What I want you to do now is look at a cup or a bottle of water or a bottle of some beverage that you're drinking. Look and see how many milliliters are in that, so that can give you an idea of how much bile the liver secretes every day. So between 500 and 1,000 mils. 80% of bile acids are reabsorbed in the ileum and returned to the liver. So your when the gallbladder, when you eat fatty foods, the gallbladder will then secrete some of the bile into the small intestine so that it can help to absorb and digest those fats. As it is continuing down into the rest of the small intestines, the ileum, which is the last part of the small intestines, will reabsorb the bile acids, and then excuse me, and then that will be returned back to the liver in order to be reprocessed and reused again. Enterohepatic circulation. Entero means intestines, or refers to, the intestines. Hepatic refers to the liver. So your enterohepatic circulation is the route of secretion, reabsorption, and resecretion of bile acids 2 or more times during digestion of an average meal. So basically what this means is that your liver will produce the bile, it'll go to the gallbladder. When your body eats a fatty meal, it'll secrete those bile acids into the small intestines and use it. Once it gets to the ileum will then resorb it. It'll go from the ileum back to the liver and then start that process again. And so that's why it says that it will do this process 2 or more times during the digestion of one meal. So that's 80% of bile acids being resorbed. 20% of it is excreted in your feces. This is actually the only way that your body eliminates excess cholesterol, is through bile being eliminated in the feces once it's secreted into the intestines. So what this means, sidebar, this means that this is why it's important for people to eat a high fiber diet to control their cholesterol. This is why when you look at like the Cheerios commercial and they're talking about it's heart healthy, it helps eliminate cholesterol. This is part of the reason, because anytime you eat lots of fiber, that fiber will help to push all of what's in the contents of your intestines out of the body. That will help to get rid of some of the cholesterol that is being eliminated through the intestines via this bile that's excreted in feces. The pancreas is a pretty cool organ. It is an organ that is posterior to the greater curvature of the stomach. Let me go back to the stomach. So this curve here is called the greater curvature. This curve is called the lesser curvature because it's the smaller one. So greater curvature, lesser curvature. So your pancreas is behind this portion of your stomach. So it will be back here somewhere on this side of the stomach, or behind this part of the stomach. Let's see. It has a head, it has a body, it has a tail. The tail is on the left. The head is near the duodenum, which is part of the small intestines. The body is the midpoint of the pancreas. The pancreas is cool because it has both endocrine and exocrine functions. Remember, endocrine is where it produces hormones. So the two hormones that it produces are insulin and glucagon. Insulin is the hormone that helps your body to take sugar out of the bloodstream and bring it into the cells so that the cells can use that sugar, that glucose, as energy. It also helps your body to store glucose in your fat cells, and it basically brings it into the fat cells so that it can be stored for use later. Glucagon is secreted into the bloodstream when your glucose is gone, or when your glucose levels of the bloodstream are low and your body needs more glucose between meals, of course. So if your body senses that your blood sugar is low, it's going to secrete this glucagon, and that's going to help your body make glucose so that it can increase your blood sugar levels. That's the endocrine portion, the pancreatic islet cells. The exocrine portion is most of what the pancreas does, and it is secreting pancreatic juices. These are your digestive enzymes. There's a pancreatic duct. A duct is like a passageway, like a tube that goes from one place to another. So there's a pancreatic duct that runs lengthwise through the middle of the pancreas. It joins the bile duct It joins the bile duct. So the pancreatic duct will run into the bile duct, and the place where it joins is called the hepatopancreatic ampulla. Even if you don't know what an ampulla is, you should know that it has something to do with these two. So hepatopancreatic means that it is the place where your the junction of your liver and your pancreas. All right. An ampulla, I think, is sort of like a bladder in that it's an open space, if I'm not mistaken. You have the hepatic pancreatic sphincter. A sphincter is a round muscle that acts like a door to open and close some organs, so that they can let things out. They can control what goes in or out of that place. So this sphincter controls the release of both bile and pancreatic juice into the duodenum. So remember that this duct is joining the bile duct in this place. And so there is a sphincter, a round muscle that's going to open and close to control the release of those into the small intestines. You also have an accessory pancreatic duct. This is a smaller duct that branches off the main duct. And this one opens up into the duodenum by itself, independent of the bile duct. This one bypasses the sphincter, and so it just allows the pancreatic juice to be released freely, even when there is no bile to be released. All right, so you have this main pancreatic duct and you have the accessory pancreatic duct. Do know both. Do know this page. So your pancreatic juices are a mixture of water, enzymes, zymogens. Remember what zymogens are. If you don't remember, go back a couple slides. Sodium bicarbonate and other electrolytes. The ducts will secrete the bicarbonate. The bicarbonate will buffer the hydrochloric acid when it leaves the stomach. This is important because remember I said that the hydrochloric acid is like pH 2 and it can eat through a whole bunch of stuff. Your stomach is specifically designed to be able to withstand that low a pH, so it's not dissolved or degraded in that time. The small intestines are not made to withstand hydrochloric acid. So this bicarbonate that's a part of the pancreatic juice is secreted into the small intestines to help neutralize this hydrochloric acid so that the hydrochloric acid in the chyme does not go and destroy your intestines, because that will be sort of useless to have a digestive process that's going to digest your digestive system. Wouldn't work very well. So that is what this bicarbonate does. So remember I said that the pancreatic juices are made up of zymogens and enzymes. Let's get into those zymogens. You have trypsinogen. Trypsinogen is then broken, or this is the inactive form. And then when it's activated, it becomes trypsin. Trypsin is autocatalytic, which basically means that once trypsin is activated, it'll convert trypsinogen to more trypsin. So once this is catalyzed and activated, if there are other trypsinogen molecules in the area, then those trypsinogen molecules will then be activated by itself to become more trypsin. You have chymotrypsin. Chymotrypsinogen is another zymogen, and this one is converted to trypsinogen by trypsin. So chymotrypsin is then turned to trypsinogen, and this trypsinogen will then be turned into trypsin. I don't know what the difference is or why there is a chymotrypsinogen that's converted to trypsinogen, and then the trypsinogen is turned to trypsin. I don't know what this process is, so I couldn't answer that for you, sorry. You have procarboxypeptidase. Remember, ACE means enzyme. Usually when you see pro in front of something, that is indicative of an inactive form of that thing. So your procarboxypeptidase, peptidase is then converted into carboxypeptidase by trypsin. So do know these three pancreatic zymogens. Other enzymes that the pancreas produces that are not zymogens, they're straight enzymes. You have amylase. So remember, we've seen amylase in three places already. There is salivary amylase, there's gastric amylase, and then there's pancreatic amylase. All the amylases do the same thing in that they digest starch. And where they digest starch depends on where they are. So this one is the one that is going to be secreted into the small intestines after the stomach, after the chyme leaves the stomach and goes into the small intestines. You have pancreatic lipase. Again, you've already seen lipase in a couple of different places. So just know that this is another place for it. Lipases. ACE is an enzyme. Lip or lipo refers to fat. So this is an enzyme that digests fat. And then you have your ribonuclease and your deoxyribonuclease. These digest nucleic material or genetic material that is eaten. So remember, again, upwards of 80–85% of digestion occurs in your small intestines. Your mechanical digestion happens in your mouth and your stomach primarily, but your chemical digestion is started in your mouth, continued in the stomach, but the majority of it occurs in the small intestines. The small intestines, though it's called small intestines, is actually the longest part of the digestive system. It's called the small intestines because the width of it is smaller than the width of the large intestines. So this is how long it is. 5 meters long in a living person, up to 8 meters long in the cadaver. And it's longer in a cadaver. So a cadaver basically meaning a person that has given their body to science so that people like us can study, human anatomy on an actual person. It's longer in a cadaver because there's no muscle tone. And so the muscles are just flaccid. Your digestive system is one long tube that is made up of muscles along with other types of tissue. And that's how you have that peristaltic movement to get the food from one place to another and to digest your food. So when we talked earlier about the motility or the movement of the digestive system, specifically when we're talking about the movement in small intestines, that movement serves three different functions. One is to mix that chyme that came out of the stomach with the juices that came from your intestines, the bile that came from your gallbladder, as well as the pancreatic juice. It mixes all of that stuff to neutralize your hydrochloric acid and to help make sure that all the food is mixed in and is in contact with these enzymes, that is in contact with this enzyme to get digestion occur more effectively. It helps to help that chyme come in contact with the mucosa for nutrient absorption. So as the food is being churned around in the small intestines, you have one bit of chyme that's going to touch the walls of the mucosa of the intestines. And then when it gets in touch with it, you can get nutrient absorption in that way. And then it helps to move everything toward the large intestines. So this intestinal motility will serve those three purposes. Mix up all the juices with the chyme, help the chyme to come in contact with the mucosa so that you can increase nutrient absorption, and to help move it all toward the large intestines. What is not being absorbed moved to the large intestines for to be compacted and removed from the body. So segmentation is a different type of movement that occurs in the digestive system. This occurs in the intestines and several places. What happens is you have like this ring-like movement that goes back and forth. It basically is moving the food back and forth to help the body to continue to come in contact with the food, to absorb the nutrients, and eventually, like once all the nutrients are removed, it'll help move it out. So you have pacemaker cells in your tissues that will help set the rhythm, how fast the segmentation occurs. Segmentation in one part of the duodenum, one part of the small intestine, specifically called the duodenum, will occur 12 times per minute, and in the ileum will occur 8 to 9 times per minute. So when the food is higher up in the duodenum, the segmentation is occurring quicker, so that more of the chyme, more of that food is being coming in contact with the walls of the small intestines, and this will help it to absorb more food. So by the time it gets further down in the small intestines, closer to the ileum, it can slow down because it should not have as many nutrients available for it to absorb. So it starts higher, and as it gets closer to the large intestines, it goes a little bit slower. When most nutrients have been absorbed and little remains, except that the rest of that food residue that is not the body is not going to use, that's when segmentation slows down and stops, and then peristalsis begins. So there's no need to have the segmentation continues. I'll see if I can find a video about segmentation and post that. So peristalsis moves the contents of the small intestines towards the colon. You have a peristaltic wave that begins up higher in the small intestines, and then it travels toward the large intestines, and then it dies out, and that will start another wave further down the tract. Your migrating motor complex is what helps to have successive overlapping waves of contraction. So this complex will help your intestines to have more waves that will help your food move toward the colon. Milk chyme. This helps to milk the chyme or move the chyme toward the intestines, the colon, which is another name for the large intestines, over a period of 2 hours. So about 2 hours it takes for your food to get through your intestines, through your small intestines, through this process. This is an example. This is just showing you how that movement works. So you have this contraction that pushes the food along, and your intestines will be, your large intestines will be over here. So at the end of your small intestines, you have the ileocecal valve. I feel like I need to go back a second. So I'm going to go back to one of the images at the beginning of the PowerPoint. Your small intestines is divided into 3 segments. Is it listed here? It is not. Small intestines is made up of 3 segments, and here it is. All right. So you have the 3 segments of your small intestines. You have the duodenum, which is the very first part that comes directly off of the stomach. So duodenum is the first part. The ileum is the last part of the small intestines. The jejunum is that middle part. So duodenum first, jejunum middle, ileum is that last part. All right, so now I'm going back. Pancreas, we already did that. Motility, pacemaker. All right. So we talked about how the peristaltic wave begins in the duodenum. Remember, the duodenum is the first part of the small intestines, and those peristaltic waves will help to move the food further down into the small intestine toward the colon. Once it gets to the end of the small intestines into the ileum, it'll come to a valve. The valve is basically like another door that will control what is leaving and entering the small intestines. So you basically want things to leave the small intestines and go into the large intestines. You do not want anything to leave the large intestines and go back into the small intestines. So this ileocecal valve is going to close and regulate what can leave and hopefully not let anything into the small intestines. The cecum is the first part of the large intestines. So when you look at this term, ileocecal valve, it's telling you that it's at the place, the junction of the ileum, which is the last part of the small intestines, and the cecum, which is the first part of the large intestines. And it is a valve that is controlling that opening. Food in the stomach will trigger a reflex that will enhance that segmentation in the ileum, and it will relax this valve so that food, whatever food is in the small intestines at the time, can then go into the cecum. As the cecum starts to fill with residue, and when they say residue, they're talking about whatever is left after all of the nutrients have been absorbed from the food that you've eaten. As the cecum fills with residue, the pressure of this filling will pinch the valve shut. So as the food leaves the small intestine and goes into the large intestine, it will eventually shut that valve so that nothing can go back from the large intestine back into the small intestines. So now we're going to talk about carbohydrates. Starch is the most digestible type of dietary carbohydrate. There are several different types of starch. You have cellulose, you have cellulose that is indigestible. Starch is first digested into oligosaccharides. So starch is like a larger molecule, and when it's digested, both mechanical and chemical digestion, it is broken down, and the first thing that is broken down to are these oligosaccharides. Oligosaccharides are basically strings of glucose. That is what starches are, strings of sugars. Oligosaccharides are strings of glucose. It's about 8 glucose residue. That is what oligosaccharides are. Oligo means, I shouldn't have said anything because I don't remember. Anyway, I think oligo means like little or few, but it's only like up to 8 residues long. Your oligosaccharides are then digested further into disaccharide, di meaning 2. So maltose, remember os means sugar. The maltose is a disaccharide. So it is a 2 molecule type of sugar. Maltose then is eventually broken down into glucose. So maltose, the 2 molecules that make up maltose are 2 glucose molecules. And those glucose molecules can then be digested, absorbed by the small intestines. We already talked about how carbohydrate digestion begins in the mouth with salivary amylase. Amylase works best at a more neutral pH. Amylase works better at a more neutral pH. So that the amylase is going to break down starch into those oligosaccharides that are like up to 8 glucose residues long. That amylase, once it gets into the stomach, it is denatured because the stomach pH is very low, and that this particular protein is not able to survive in that area. So you have pH that is neutral in the mouth that it can work. So that's where carbohydrates begin to be digested. And then once it gets in the stomach, the amylase is not working because it's denatured, and other nutrients are being digested more because amylase is now denatured. Once that chyme then goes into the small intestines, and the hydrochloric acid is neutralized, because remember, the small intestines cannot handle that low pH without being destroyed. So the bicarbonate will go into the small intestines and neutralize the hydrochloric acid. That's when your pancreas can secrete more amylase into the small intestines to continue to digest that starch into oligosaccharides, and the oligosaccharides into maltose. The brush border is the inside border of your intestines, that where you have those finger-like projections, the villi, the cilia, that are on the ends of your cells. That's called the brush border. The brush border has enzymes associated with it. These will help continue to digest the carbohydrates. Go ahead and read this so that you can see the different enzymes that will digest different types of molecules. And yes, this is important. So now we're going to talk about lactose. Lactose is the sugar of milk. So lactose intolerance, people that don't have lactase is the enzyme that breaks down lactose. When people don't have lactase, then when they eat or drink a dairy product, that lactose will go through the body undigested and will eventually end up into the large intestine as an entire molecule, because they don't have the enzyme to digest this sugar. When this whole undigested sugar gets into the large intestines, it increases osmolarity of the stomach contents. When the osmolarity is increased, water will follow, so that the water will then go into the colon, and that's what causes the diarrhea. Basically, your body is trying to wash it out. Gas is then produced, or can be produced, by bacteria that is eating and fermenting that lactose. So not only is your intestines creating or adding water into the area to help dilute this, which causes diarrhea, but then you also have this gas production by bacteria eating on the intact lactose, causing fermentation, which can cause gas. Most people in the world are lactose intolerant. And this is the breakdown. So you have about 15% of white Americans are lactose intolerant. About 90% of Black Americans are lactose intolerant. Most people of Asian descent, and the majority of Mediterranean. So again, most people in the world no longer have lactase once they grow up and they're no longer drinking mom's milk. Most people are not. So this is why most people are lactose intolerant. People who are lactose intolerant often can consume yogurt and cheese without these same problems, because when yogurt and cheese are made, the way they're made is by bacteria actually being added to the culture of yogurt, of the milk that produces those products, and that bacteria will already break down the lactose. So if you are lactose intolerant, you cannot eat or cannot drink milk, but you can eat cheese and yogurt without a problem. This is why, because the bacteria that is put into the milk to make these products will break down the lactose so that once you eat it, you don't have problems because it's not there. Let's talk about proteins. So proteins are made up of amino acids. As your enzymes digest the proteins, it breaks it down into smaller and smaller parts, eventually becoming individual amino acids. These amino acids can then be absorbed by the small intestines. You have amino acids that come from several different places. One is dietary. So the food that you eat becomes your amino acids. You have amino acids that come from digestive enzymes that digest each other. So as your enzymes, remember you have some zymogens that are activated, but then you have enzymes that are no longer being used. All of that occurs. And when that happens, these enzymes break each other down and you can get amino acids from that. Remember, your body is recycling all of these raw materials. And then when your cells actually slough off, they are digested by enzymes so that your body reuses the materials of those cells to use to make other things, or if those parts need to be removed, they can be removed out of the body. But those are the three places that your body gets amino acids from. These two places, the last two, the digestive enzymes digesting each other and your sloughed off epithelial cells, are endogenous amino acids. This accounts for about 30 grams of amino acids every day. And the exogenous sources from the dietary, from what you eat, is about 44 to 60 grams of amino acids every day. Proteases and peptidases, these are the enzymes that digest protein. This is the name of the enzymes that digest proteins. They start their work in the stomach because proteases work best in that low pH. So in the presence of hydrochloric acid, we have a very low pH. This is where proteases kind of shine and do their thing. Pepsin will hydrolyze any of the peptide bonds between these two amino acids. So when you have proteins, when you have proteins, when the pepsin is basically looking at the protein, if it sees a tyrosine and a phenylalanine together, it's going to go in and break the bond between those two. That is how the pepsin actually works. Pepsin digests 10 to 15% of the dietary protein into shorter peptides and some free amino acids. So if you have like an amino acid at the end of a peptide and it has this bond, then that's how you get the free amino acids from pepsin. Make sure you're looking at this to help you understand the process a little bit better. This is showing you where your trypsin and your chymotrypsin will act on these peptides. So now lipids. Lipids are complicated. Remember that lipids are fat, oil and water don't mix, so fat and waters don't mix. Lipids are considered hydrophobic, so they don't love water. They actually kind of hate water. That's why they don't mix. Because it's hydrophobic, that makes digestion, breaking down of the lipids a little bit more complex, because you have this, like all of this liquid-based fluid that's helping to digest everything. So your lipases, which are your enzymes that digest fats, you have several different types. You have your lingual lipase, lingual meaning pertaining to the tongue. So lingual lipase will be secreted by your salivary glands into the mouth. So as soon as you put food in the mouth, if there is a fatty component, it will start to be digested in the mouth with these lingual lipases. It becomes more active in the stomach because remember, never mind. It becomes more active in the stomach along with gastric lipase. So there's even more lipase that is secreted into the stomach to help to break down the lipids. 10 to 15% of your lipids are digested before it reaches the duodenum. So remember, 10 to 15% before it gets into the small intestines. Nucleic acids. Remember, this is your genetic material. Genetic material is found in everything that you're eating that used to be alive. So whether it's plants or animal foods, they both have genetic material made up of nucleic acids. So you have nucleases that will degrade, that will digest your DNA and RNA into nucleotides. You have nucleosidases and phosphatases are two other enzymes. These particular ones are located in the brush border that will help to digest your nucleic acids as well. Vitamins can be absorbed into the body unchanged. So if your food is high in vitamins, once it comes in contact with your epithelial linings, then it can be absorbed directly into the body. It does not have to be digested. You have both fat-soluble vitamins, you have water-soluble vitamins. You should already know that. I want you to know this because this is what I do. So fat-soluble vitamins, the fat-soluble vitamins are A, D, E, and K. These are the only 4 fat-soluble vitamins. And these are a reason why we need to eat fat. Like if you had a no-fat diet, then you would be severely deficient in getting your fat-soluble vitamins because there's nothing to carry them into the body. So yeah, some fat is good, especially if it's a good quality fat. If it is ingested, as I mentioned, without fat-containing food, then it can't be absorbed. So whatever you eat, it just remains in your intestines and eventually gets washed out, or not washed out, but gets evacuated from your body through feces. Then you have your water soluble vitamins. So all the rest of your vitamins are water soluble. That's the B complex of vitamins, your vitamin C, all of your rest of your vitamins are considered water soluble. So water is interesting. In the body, you have to have a good balance of water, and that balance of water needs to be in specific places in the body. So your digestive system helps your body to balance how much water there is, and so that you can eventually, your body can put the water where it needs it to be. Your digestive system can receive about 9 liters of water per day. Of course, it comes from a variety of places because most of us are not drinking 9 liters of water a day. Think about a 2-liter bottle of drink. That would be 5 of those, 4.5 of those. And again, most of us are not drinking that much water. A gallon of water is approximately 4 liters. So, again, we're not drinking that much, but that much goes through the digestive tract. So a little bit less than a liter of water is found in your food. It can be more if you eat high amounts of fresh fruit and vegetables because they have a lot of water in them. Of course, you have water in your drinks, so it's not just your water that you're drinking. It's soda, it's coffee, it's tea. All of that has some water in it. not in the best form, but those still have water in it. But then the majority of it comes from your gastrointestinal secretions. 8 liters of it is absorbed by the small intestines, with the rest of your nutrients. The rest of it is absorbed by, or the last of it, I should say, is absorbed by your large intestines. Some of it is actually it leaves the body with your feces. When people have hard to pass stools, really hard stools, that is because they have less water available to be voided out with feces. This is part of the reason why we need to drink plenty of water, so that we can actually have some that still remains in the feces, so that we can pass feces a lot easier. Water is absorbed by osmosis out of the intestines into the body. It follows salts and organic nutrients. So remember, some time ago, I mentioned that water follows salt, water follows sodium. This is an example of that. So when your body absorbs these salts and organic nutrients, then the water will follow those nutrients. Diarrhea occurs when you have too much water still in the lumen or in the inside of the large intestines, and it is not absorbed back into the body. That is what diarrhea is. So whether that is occurring because you're drinking too much water too fast and the body can't absorb it fast enough, or because you have bacteria or something that your body's trying to flush out, there's several reasons why you might have loose stools, but that is basically what is occurring. Constipation occurs when you have too little water. So if too much of that water gets resorbed into the body, then the feces becomes harder and it is harder to pass. This also occurs when feces moves too slow. So when a person's feces remains in the digestive system too long, in the colon too long, then the body will continue to absorb water from it, and that will make the poop harder and make it harder and harder to pass. So it'll become more solid and harder to pass. So remember, we mentioned several times that you have more bacterial cells inside of you than you have U cells inside of you. Some of these bacteria are in your intestines. They're called your microbiome. You in certain spaces in medicine, you'll hear this a lot, because science and medicine are now finally realizing how important bacteria is to being, our health. So you have this gut microbiome that has over 800 species of bacteria inside of your large intestines. Lots and lots of different types of bacteria in your large intestines. Part of the function of these bacteria in your intestines are to help you to digest foods, as well as synthesizing certain vitamins that we can't synthesize on our own. So having bacteria, a healthy mix of bacteria in your intestines, is good for your health. When people have the gut microbiome that is not what it's supposed to be, that is out of balance, or that has been wiped out by antibiotics, then that's when you start having more problems. Your health can start to decline. And you can also see a lot of different issues that you may not even realize are occurring because you don't have the proper mix and amount of bacteria in your gut. These gut microbes cause gas cause flatulence. So when a person passes gas, what basically has happened is the bacteria in the intestines has been digesting something and it caused the gas. Remember, we talked about the lactose earlier, where bacteria can start to digest that previously undigested lactose, and that can create gas. It's the same idea. Average person will produce about 500 mils of gas every day. This is pretty normal. Most of the gas that is produced is resorbed into the body instead of passing out of the body as flatus. Much of the flatus, according to this, is swallowed air. So as you're talking, as you're eating, you are not only taking in food and water, but you're also taking in air. And once you swallow it, it goes through the digestive system. But as I mentioned before, your bacteria also adds to the flatulence that you have. Hydrogen sulfide, indole, and skatol are the chemicals that actually produce the odor of feces. Hydrogen gas could explode under electrical cauterization used during surgery. So when a surgeon is doing surgery in the intestines, they have to be very careful of how they do it. I don't know the process because I've never seen an abdominal surgery or an intestinal surgery, but I do know that because hydrogen gas is flammable and can explode, they take certain precautions so that you don't want to have a person's gut explode while they're on the operating table. That would not be a good look. So the large intestines takes about 36 to 48 hours to reduce residue of a meal to feces. So once you eat a meal, it does not come out of you as feces until at least 2 days later. So a day and a half to 2 days later. So when you eat, if you're pooping shortly afterwards, that's not the meal that you just ate. That is the meal that you ate 36 to 48 hours ago that is finally coming out. Your food will spend the most time in the transverse colon. It does not chemically change the residue. It doesn't chemically change the residue. Remember that most of the changes, the digestion occurs in the small intestines. What it does is it resorbs water and electrolytes. So it takes whatever water is still left in the feces and it starts to remove some of it and also removes some of the electrolytes. Feces, once it gets ready to leave the body, it is about 75% water and 25% solid. A good bit of those solids are actually bacteria. So a large percentage of the feces that you pass are actually bacteria and not what you just ate. A large part of it is actually undigested fiber, so about 30%. And then you have other things like fat, mucus, salts, proteins, etc. There's another type of contractions that occurs. You have haustral contractions that occur every 30 minutes. This churns and mixes the residue, meaning the feces residue, which helps to remove the water because you're churning it around so that the body can, the intestinal walls can come in contact with the water and resorb some of that water and salts. You have movements that are stronger that can occur a few times a day. These are triggered by these two reflexes. The filling of the stomach and the duodenum will stimulate the motility of the colon. So every part of digestion will stimulate another part of digestion. So remember, it starts when you look at or think about food, smell food, that triggers your stomach to start producing some enzymes, and it starts that peristaltic movement. But that continues, that once you put the food in your mouth, that movement gets stronger. As the food moves down further to digestive tract, then even further down, digestive tract starts to move so that it moves the previous day's food closer to the rectum and eventually out. When food reaches the rectum will stretch in response to how big or how bulky the stool is, and that will stimulate defecation, and it'll do it in a couple different ways. This is why you have the urge to poop right after a meal, if your body hasn't, if your body still has that response. Children have it, so you'll notice that when children eat, they'll go poop shortly after. And for some reason, men seem to have this reflex more than women in my observation. But if a person is eating and then shortly, within 10, 20, 30 minutes after they eat, they have to go defecate, this is why. And that is a normal reaction. You have your intrinsic defecation reflex, and then you have the parasympathetic defecation reflex. So the intrinsic reflex works entirely within the myenteric plexus. This is a relatively weak response. You have the parasympathetic defecation reflex that involves the spinal cord. So when the rectum stretches, it sends sensory signals to the spinal cord. Spinal cord processes that information, and then the pelvic nerve will return the signal and intensify that peristalsis. So think about when we talk about reflexes in lab, this is one of the reflexes that we have. So you have a stretch reflex in when the rectum, from the amount of poop that you have in the rectum, that will send a signal to your central nervous system. Central nervous system will then send a reflex back telling your intestines to intensify peristalsis. And then it'll also tell those two sphincters, this sphincter, the anal sphincter. Remember, sphincter is a round muscle that holds, that allows things to move out of an area. So this anal sphincter will relax, and when it relaxes, that allows the feces to pass out of the body. Defecation can only occur when those two muscles are relaxed. So if this basically means that if you are trying to strain, if you are stressed while you're trying to poop, it'll make it a lot harder. When people poop, they need to be relaxed so that everything can flow the way it's supposed to. Abdominal contractions or the Valsalva maneuver will increase abdominal pressure and compress the rectum. So Valsalva maneuver is basically what happens when people take a deep breath, hold their breath, and then bear down to try to force poop to come out of their body. That is called the Valsalva maneuver. And this will increase the abdominal pressure and actually compress the rectum. All right. So is this the last slide? Yes, it is. So let me go back to that one. Interesting. So a Canadian was shot accidentally with a shotgun in 1822. And from that shotgun, the man had a hole big enough in his stomach, big enough for a finger to go in it. It was covered by a flap of tissue that remained, but it was still a big old hole in the man's stomach. That is very interesting. So this doctor experimented on him, removed samples of it, and made observation. And this is how they proved that digestion required hydrochloric acid. And that book was published in 1833. I may have to try to find that book. But this is basically what laid the foundation of medicine figuring out how the stomach worked. So that is this chapter. Let me know if you have any questions.